Pull back, Colonel Hargrove screamed into the radio, his voice cracking with fury. That sniper is a liability. She's drawing fire on my men. I'm ordering her out of position now. 8 wounded SEALs pinned inside a crumbling compound. 30 enemy fighters closing in from every direction. And the one person keeping them alive was just ordered to stand down by the man who was supposed to save them. Comment your city below and subscribe because what she did next will stay with you for the rest of your life. The radio call came in at 14:47, and Lieutenant Commander Ethan Walker knew from the first syllable that the day had turned deadly. While he had been on enough operations to recognize that specific tone, the one where a soldier's voice drops half an octave, and the words come out pressed together, each one arriving like a fist pounding on a door. The voice on the other end belonged to Sergeant First Class Marcus Doyle, the team's forward element lead, and he was not panicking. Marcus Doyle didn't panic. That was what made the call so terrifying. Walker, we're hit. Say again, we are hit. Multiple casualties. I count 3 down and we're taking fire from the north ridge, the eastern wall, and something I can't even locate yet. We walked right into it. Ethan pressed himself against the stone interior of what used to be a farmhouse and felt the wall shudder as a burst of machine gun fire chewed through the mud brick exterior 6 inches above his head. Dust rained down on him like fine snow. How many, he said. 30, maybe more. They were waiting for us, Ethan. They knew the route, they knew the timing. Somebody talked. That word somebody landed in Walker's chest like a stone dropped into still water. He didn't have time to sit with it. He shoved it down and did the math instead. 30 enemy fighters with pre-established firing positions against a 9-man SEAL team. 3 of them already wounded in a compound with crumbling walls and ammunition that was burning through faster than he wanted to calculate. Where's Petty Officer Cho? His leg is open. He's stable for now. Reyes' worst took a round to the shoulder and his vest stopped, most of it, but the fragment did something to his side. He's conscious, but I'm not putting odds on that staying that way. And Kellerman. A pause. Longer than it should have been. Kellerman's not talking to anyone right now, Commander. Ethan closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. That was the maximum he allowed himself. Then he opened them, checked his rifle, and moved. The compound was a collection of 3 connected rooms in an open courtyard that had become a kill zone the moment the ambush started. The enemy had planned it with a precision that bordered on surgical. Machine gun positions on the north ridge controlled the courtyard completely. Anyone who stepped into the open was dead within seconds. On the eastern perimeter, a team of fighters with rocket-propelled grenade launchers had already destroyed the 2 vehicles the SEALs arrived in, cutting off any possibility of driving out. From the southern approach, which should have been their escape route, another group had sealed the gap within the first 3 minutes of contact. 30 fighters, pre-positioned, coordinated, patient. Whoever planned this ambush had done it with care. Ethan reached Marcus Doyle's position in the northern room and dropped beside him. Doyle was a man built like a door, broad, solid, with hands that looked like they'd been carved from wood. Right now, those hands were wrapped around his rifle with the careful grip of a man who understood that every round he fired was a calculation. What do we have left? Ethan asked. 4 full magazines between the 6 of us who are still shooting. Reyes has 1 left, but I told him to hold it. Chose out entirely. And the medevac, 40 minutes minimum. That's if they push the bird right now, which they haven't, because the valley is still technically active, and command wants confirmation before they send. Tell them I'm confirming, Ethan said. Right now, tell them we have critical casualties and that if they wait for clean airspace, they're bringing body bags. Marcus reached for the radio without another word. Ethan moved to the northern wall and pressed his eye against a crack between 2 stones. The ridge was maybe 900 meters out, steep and rocky, the kind of terrain that gave any shooter positioned up there a commanding view of everything below. He could see the muzzle flash from the machine gun nest, 2 fighters, 1 operating and 1 feeding, and he understood immediately why nobody could move. That single position controlled everything. As long as that gun kept firing, the SEALs were pinned. As long as they were pinned, they were dying slowly. And with 40 minutes until any helicopter arrived, slowly was fast enough. Where's our overwatch? Ethan said. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Marcus, where is Staff Sergeant Carter? Last confirmed communication was 22 minutes ago. She reported enemy movement on the western approach, and then her radio went quiet. Ethan felt something cold move through him. It wasn't fear exactly, it was a specific sensation of a variable going from known to unknown, the moment a plan starts unraveling at its most critical seam. Staff Sergeant Olivia Carter had been positioned on a secondary ridge to the northwest, roughly 1,100 meters from the compound assigned to Overwatch for exactly this kind of moment. She was the team's eye from above. If she had gone silent, either she was dead compromised or had made a decision to go dark for tactical reasons. He needed to know which one. "Get me her frequency," he said. "Commander, I've been trying. There's nothing." "Then keep trying." Another burst of machine gun fire tore through the wall above them, and both men flattened instinctively. When it stopped, Ethan counted the seconds the way his father taught him to count. Thunder after lightning, measuring distance, measuring time, measuring how much of either one he had left. He had very little of both. 960 meters to the northwest, on a shelf of rock barely wide enough for a human body, Staff Sergeant Olivia Carter had not moved in 31 minutes. She was lying behind her rifle in the full prone position, every muscle in her body controlled, and still her breathing reduced to the slow, shallow rhythm that her instructor had drilled into her during a training cycle that had nearly broken her in ways she never talked about. The cold of the rock underneath her had moved through her uniform into her bones somewhere around the 20-minute mark. She didn't acknowledge it. Pain was information. Pain wasn't instruction. What was happening below her in the compound was both. She had watched the ambush trigger with a detachment that she had trained herself to maintain, and that still cost her something every single time. She'd seen the vehicles get hit. She'd seen the SEALs scatter for cover. She'd watched the enemy machine gun position on the North Ridge open up and understood within 3 seconds of watching its firing pattern that it was the anchor of the entire ambush remove, that, and the structure collapsed. She had also watched 4 fighters break from the eastern tree line and begin climbing toward her position. That was why her radio was off. The moment she keyed that radio, the signal would give her away. The enemy had signals intelligence. She'd seen the equipment through her scope. The handheld device one of the fighters was carrying was not a standard field radio. They were hunting transmissions. She turned her radio off and made a calculation that she understood was going to look like either genius or suicide depending on how the next 30 minutes went. She had 5 problems, and she was going to solve them in order. The first problem was the 4 fighters climbing toward her. She couldn't let them reach her position, not because of what it would do to her. She had made a quiet peace with that possibility the moment she turned the radio off, but because if she was compromised, the machine gun on the North Ridge would never go silent, and every man in that compound would die. So she solved the first problem. 2 shots, suppressed, precise, the kind of shooting that her first instructor had called economical and that she privately thought of as honest, no wasted motion, no wasted breath, no performance, just accuracy in service of a specific human outcome. 2 of the 4 fighters stopped climbing. The remaining 2 scattered into cover. She had bought herself time, not much but enough. The second problem was the machine gun nest. 960 meters was a long shot, but not an exceptional one. Not in clean conditions, not with her rifle and ammunition. The conditions were not clean. Wind from the west had been shifting every 40 to 60 seconds in a pattern she'd been tracking for the past quarter hour, and the altitude differential between her position and the nest introduced a calculation she'd run 3 times in her head to make sure she wasn't wrong. She wasn't wrong. She had been wrong once, years ago, in a training exercise in front of an instructor who told her afterward, not unkindly but without softening it, that in a real situation her error would have killed a teammate. She had never forgotten the specific quality of the silence that followed that statement. It had become a permanent resident inside her, quiet but present, reminding her every time she settled behind a rifle that the difference between close and accurate was the difference between life and something else. She waited for the wind to settle. She controlled her breathing. She felt her heart rate slow to something that other people watching might have thought was impossible. She squeezed. The machine gun on the North Ridge went silent. Inside the compound, Ethan Walker heard the sudden absence of that relentless hammering and felt it in his bones before his brain processed what it meant. He looked at Marcus Doyle. "Did we negative?" Marcus said. "We didn't fire anything at that position." They looked at each other for a moment that lasted longer than it had any right to. "Then someone else did," Ethan said. Colonel Dennis Hargrove received the situation report from the operations center at 15:04, and his first reaction was to check the time, then check it again, as if he didn't trust the first reading. His second reaction was to pull up the operational map and study it with the concentrated attention of a man who had been moving forces around maps for 27 years and believed with the unshakable confidence of long experience that he understood what he was looking at. I was wrong about that, but he didn't know it yet. Who authorized the Overwatch sniper to engage, he said. Captain Renee Hollis, his operations officer, looked up from her terminal. Sir Staff Sergeant Carter appears to have made an independent assessment of... I didn't ask for an assessment, Captain. I asked who authorized the engagement. The team was taking critical casualties. Our read is that Carter identified the machine gun position as the primary. She's a support element, Hargrove said, and his voice had that particular flatness that his staff had learned to read as a warning sign. She is assigned to observe and provide limited support at the commander's discretion. She is not assigned to run a solo engagement at, he checked the data on the screen, 900 plus meters against a reinforced enemy position. She is one soldier. She has now drawn additional enemy attention to a ridgeline that may be her only exit. Sir, she may also have bought the pinned team a pull her back, Hargrove said. Hollis blinked. Sir, radio Staff Sergeant Carter and order her to withdraw from her position immediately. She's a liability at this point. She's drawing fire that is complicating our extraction planning, and I will not have an undisciplined Overwatch element destabilizing this operation further. The room went very quiet. Not the silence of agreement, the silence of people who understood what the order meant and were doing the math. Colonel Hollis said carefully, if we pull Carter now, the compound has no Overwatch. The team has 4 magazines of ammunition distributed among 6 shooters. The medevac window is still. I heard the numbers, Captain. Hargrove turned back to the map. Execute the order. Hollis looked at the map, looked at the data, looked at the clock. Then she reached for the radio. She keyed Carter's frequency. Static. She tried again. Nothing. Sir, I'm getting no response from Carter's radio. Hargrove's jaw tightened. Keep trying. Yes, sir. But Hollis's hand stayed near the radio without quite transmitting again, and the order hung in the air of the operations center, like smoke from a fire that everyone could smell, but nobody was acknowledging. Olivia heard nothing from the operations center because her radio was off, and her radio was off because keeping it on would get her killed, and she was not ready to get killed yet. She had 3 problems left. The third problem was the rocket team on the eastern wall. She had identified them during the first 8 minutes of the ambush. 2 fighters with RPG launchers who had already fired twice, once at the vehicles and once at the compound's main entrance. They were positioned behind a collapsed section of an old stone wall that gave them cover on 2 sides in a clear firing lane into the compound. If the SEALs tried to move, the rocket team would light up any exposed position. They were the door lock on the escape route. She solved the third problem. The distance was closer 600 meters, and she didn't have the wind issue at that angle. 2 rounds, 32 seconds between them, because after the first shot, she needed to shift her position by 4 meters before they could triangulate on her muzzle flash. She made the shift. She fired the second shot. The rocket team stopped being a problem. Inside the compound, Ethan Walker was on the radio to Marcus Doyle when the sound of the second distant shot reached them. Suppressed but not silent, just a whispered crack across the valley's acoustics. That's a sniper, Marcus said. I know. That's our sniper. I know. She's still alive. Walker felt something he couldn't afford to feel just yet, so he set it aside and focused on what the shots meant tactically. With the rocket team down and the machine gun silenced, a window had opened in the eastern approach that hadn't existed 4 minutes ago. It wasn't a clean exit. There were still fighters at multiple positions, but it was the beginning of one. Tell everyone to be ready to move on my signal, he said, and keep that radio on Carter's frequency. She's not responding. I know. Keep it on anyway. The fourth problem was the enemy communications element. Olivia had spotted it early, a fighter positioned near the back of the attack force, carrying what she had identified as a signals device coordinating the overall engagement. Cut communications and the attack became 30 individual fighters instead of 30 coordinated ones. 30 individual fighters were still dangerous. 30 individual fighters who didn't know what the others were doing were survivable. She shifted. She breathed. She waited for the precise moment when the fighter stepped out from behind his cover to reach for something on the ground. People always reached for things on the ground at the wrong moment. She knew this from an experience she had gathered the hard way in places she didn't talk about at social gatherings, in the company of people who understood that some knowledge only comes with a specific price. She fired. The communications element stopped communicating. And something changed in the attack's rhythm. Immediately she could see it through her scope, the slight hesitation. The fighters who had been moving with coordinated purpose beginning to look at each other instead of at their targets. It was small. It was the first crack in a wall. But walls didn't come down until there was a first crack. The fifth problem was the most dangerous one. The two fighters who had scattered when she dropped their companions during the climb were still out there. She had tracked their movement as best she could while managing the other engagements. But she'd had to pull her attention away twice, and now she didn't have eyes on them. She didn't know where they were. That was the most dangerous information a shooter could have, not the location of a known threat, the unknown location of a motivated one. She shifted her position to her secondary spot, 10 meters to the right, lower on the shelf. Better concealment, but reduced sightline to the compound. She didn't love it, but she loved staying alive enough to accept the trade. She settled in. She started looking. Inside the compound at 1517, something happened that Ethan Walker would describe in debrief as the moment I understood we had a chance. A rocket position that had been preventing any lateral movement along the compound's north wall suddenly went quiet. Then a coordinated push by 4 fighters on the southwest corner, a push that Marcus Doyle had been watching build for 6 minutes, with the particular dread of a man who understands he has no good answer for what's coming, suddenly faltered. 2 of the 4 fighters stopped. The other 2 pulled back. "What just happened?" Doyle said. "She happened," Walker said. He pressed himself against the north wall and looked through his spotting glass at the distant ridge. From this angle, at this distance, in this light, he could see nothing. No movement, no muzzle flash, no evidence of any human presence whatsoever. He was looking at a rock shelf that appeared completely empty, and was he now understood the most important piece of real estate on the battlefield. "Somebody is up there," he said quietly. "Somebody is working this whole engagement from one rifle, and whoever it is, they are buying us time that we didn't have 10 minutes ago." "Carter," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "Had to be," Walker said. "Radio her again." "Commander, she's still." "I know. Radio her anyway. I want her to know we know she's there. Maybe she's monitoring even if she can't transmit." Marcus keyed the radio. "Carter, this is Walker's team. If you're reading us, know that we see what you're doing. We're going to give you something to work with. On my signal, we're going to create noise on the eastern side. Use it. Static, then nothing. But 1,100 meters to the northwest, in a prone position on a cold shelf of rock, Olivia Carter had her radio monitoring on receive, only the earpiece feeding her just enough signal to hear incoming without transmitting anything that could be localized. She heard Walker's message. She didn't move a muscle. But something shifted in her chest, not sentiment, not the warm feeling that other people might call reassurance. Something more functional than that. The specific knowledge that the men below had not given up, were not waiting to be rescued, were planning to fight their way into a position where she could finish what she'd started. She tightened her grip on the rifle. She went back to work. At 15:23, Ethan Walker gave the signal. 3 SEAL operators still capable of sustained fire opened up simultaneously on the eastern wall, not with any real expectation of hitting anyone, but with the specific intention of creating a wall of noise and distraction that would pull every enemy eye in that direction for approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds was what Walker had calculated. He had no idea if it would be enough. It was 3 seconds more than she needed. From her position on the northwest shelf, Olivia had spent the previous 6 minutes identifying 2 additional firing positions that had been keeping the southern approach, the exit route, untenable. She'd mapped them in her head, the wind calculations, and prepared for the moment when the noise below would give her the audio cover she needed to fire twice in rapid succession without the sound suppression alone carrying the shot. The eastern wall exploded with gunfire. She fired, then fired again. The southern approach opened up like a locked door hitting the end of its chain. It wasn't clean. It wasn't safe. There were still fighters in the surrounding area who were mobile and dangerous. But it was a gap, and gaps were what SEALs were trained to find and run through before they closed. Walker saw it happen through his spotting glass. The two positions that had been anchoring the southern approach simply stopped functioning, and he turned to Marcus Doyle with the expression of a man who has just seen something that recalibrates his understanding of what's possible. "Move," he said. "Cho and Reyes first, everyone else covering. We go in 30 seconds. "Where are we going?" "South, through the gap. Whoever is on that ridge just opened us a door, and I'm not going to insult them by not walking through it." In the operations center, Colonel Hargrove watched the situational display with the tight expression of a man recalibrating without being willing to admit it. "Walker's team is moving," Hollis reported. "I can see that. The southern approach, the data shows those two positions are neutralized. That's Carter's work." Hargrove said nothing. "Sir," Hollis said, and there was something careful and precise in her voice, the tone of a person choosing every word with the understanding that what she said next would not be forgotten. "Staff Sergeant Carter just opened the only viable exit route for a 9-man SEAL team by engaging multiple hardened positions from a solo overwatch, with her radio off while simultaneously evading enemy fighters who were actively hunting her. She did this without authorization, yes. She also just saved 8 American lives. Those aren't separate facts." Hargrove looked at the display. He looked at the clock. He looked at the route Walker's team was now moving through. "Get me Carter's status," he said. "We still can't reach her." "Then get me an Apache in the air over that ridge." "Sir." "Now, Captain, if she's still up there, she's going to need a way out." It was not an apology. It was not an acknowledgement that his order had been wrong, but it was something. And sometimes in the architecture of human decisions made under impossible pressure, something is the first brick in a wall that eventually becomes an accounting. The two fighters who had gone quiet on the northwest slope had not gone far. They had been trained well enough to know that a sniper who had just eliminated multiple high-value positions was not going to stay in one place. So they moved carefully, reading the ground, looking for the signs that a human body leaves when it presses into earth. Compressed, disturbed stone, the slight mark of a boot toe on soil that hadn't been touched. They were good at this. They were not good enough. Olivia had anticipated them, not because she had supernatural awareness, but because she had, at some point in the past several years, internalized the truth that anyone who came after her would be using the same logic she used to track targets. She knew how hunters thought because she was one. She knew which positions looked obvious and which looked hidden and which were both simultaneously, and she knew that the second category was where danger waited. She let them get close. Not because she wanted them close, but because at the distance she'd last seen them a shot would have been marginal, and marginal was a word she had excised from her vocabulary, in the same way she'd excised fear. Not by pretending it didn't exist, but by deciding it didn't get a vote. At 70 meters, she had the first one in her peripheral vision. At 50, she had both. At 35, she made a decision. She had 2 rounds in the current magazine. She had 1 additional magazine on her person. She did the arithmetic. Then she did something that was not in any manual she'd ever read, and that her first instructor, the one who told her about the training exercise mistake, might have called improvisation, in the neutral way he reserved for things that weren't wrong, but that he hadn't thought to teach. She made a sound, not a voice, not a word, just enough sound to make the first fighter's head turn left instead of continuing forward, pulling his attention toward a direction where he would see nothing for approximately 2 seconds. 2 seconds was enough. She took the first shot, then the second before the first fighter had finished falling. The rocky shelf went quiet again. 960 meters below to the southeast, 8 SEAL operators were moving through a gap in the enemy's line toward an extraction point that 6 minutes ago hadn't existed. 3 of them were wounded. All of them were alive. And on a ridge that looked from every angle like nothing but rock and sky and the empty indifference of mountains that had witnessed every kind of human drama across centuries and held none of it. A woman who was not supposed to be the main event of this day lay behind her rifle with an empty magazine, alone with enemy fighters regrouping below her, and a radio she hadn't turned on in 43 minutes. She pulled out the final magazine. She loaded it. She looked through the scope. She found the helicopter. She found the approach path. She found the 3 positions that still threatened it. And she understood with the clarity of someone who has reduced a problem to its most essential components that she had exactly enough ammunition to handle this or to handle her own exit, not both. She made the choice the way she made all her choices, without drama, without ceremony, with only the quiet conviction of someone who decided long ago that the job mattered more than the comfort of doing the version of it that was easier to survive. She started working the final three positions. The helicopter kept descending. Below her, Ethan Walker looked up at a ridge. He still couldn't locate anyone on in the direction of a woman he wasn't sure was alive, and said something that wasn't quite a prayer and wasn't quite a tactical assessment. "Come on," he said quietly. "Come on." The helicopter touched down. His team loaded. The rotors began to accelerate, and he told the pilot something that wasn't on any checklist. "We're not leaving, not until we know about the shooter on that ridge." The pilot's name was Chief Warrant Officer Danny Tran, and he had been flying combat medevac for 11 years, which meant he had developed a very specific relationship with the word no. He heard it from Walker now. "We're not lifting," Walker said. "Not yet." Tran turned in his seat. "Commander, I have 3 critical wounded on board. My orders." "Your orders came from people who aren't sitting on this helicopter looking at that ridge right now." Walker's voice was flat and even, not aggressive, not emotional. The specific tone of a man who has already finished the argument inside his own head and is simply delivering the conclusion. "Give me 5 minutes." "Commander, 4 minutes and 50 seconds now." Tran looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the ridge. Then he looked back at his instruments. 4 minutes, he said. "After that, I'm lifting with or without your blessing because I've got men bleeding out on my floor." "Understood," Walker said. He turned to Marcus Doyle, who was already on the radio, cycling through every frequency they had for Carter's equipment. "Static, static, static." "She turned it off," Doyle said. "I know why she turned it off. That doesn't help us find her." Walker pressed himself to the helicopter's open door and looked at the northwest ridge with the focused intensity of a man trying to see something that didn't want to be seen. He had his spotting glass up. He was reading the terrain the way he'd been trained to read it, not looking for a person because a good sniper didn't look like a person from 900 meters away. He was looking for the absence of randomness, for the one thing on that ridge that was too still, or too deliberate, or too precisely positioned to be an accident of geology. "There," he said. "What? Southwest face of the secondary shelf. She's not on the main ridge. She moved down and right, maybe 20 meters from the original overwatch position." He handed Doyle the glass. "Look at the shadow line at the base of that rock formation." Doyle looked. He was quiet for several seconds. "I don't see." "Stop looking for a person. Look for something that doesn't move the way everything else moves." Another silence. "I see it," Doyle said quietly, and then lower, "She's not moving." 1631. Olivia Carter was not moving because movement was the enemy of survival, and she had already spent everything she had on offense. Her final magazine was half empty. She had fired 6 of the 12 rounds on 3 targets that threatened the helicopter's approach, and those 6 shots had accomplished what 6 shots needed to accomplish, which was that the helicopter had landed and the SEAL team had loaded, and the rotors were spinning, and below her in the valley, the tactical situation had shifted from catastrophic to merely dangerous. That was the good news. The bad news was everything else. She had 2 fighters still actively hunting her on the slope below her current position. She had located one of them 3 minutes ago and tracked his movement until the rock formation between them cut her sightline. The second one she'd lost entirely, which was the thought that occupied the back of her mind with the persistent, low-grade intensity of a fire alarm in a distant room. She also had a problem with her left hand. She hadn't acknowledged it consciously yet because acknowledging it would have used cognitive space she needed elsewhere. But there was a specific wrongness in the way her left hand was braced under the rifle's forend, a trembling that wasn't from cold or exhaustion, or rather wasn't only from those things, and a wetness she hadn't looked at directly because looking required her to move her eye from the scope. She kept her eye on the scope. She controlled her breathing. She counted seconds the way her father taught her when she was 11 years old and they were lying in a field outside their Colorado home watching a hawk hole position in wind that should have been pushing it sideways, and he'd said, "Watch how she breathes. She's not fighting the wind, Livy. She's working with it. Patient wins." She had never told anyone about that memory. It was hers in the specific way that the things that shaped you were yours, not possessions, but architecture. Patient wins. She waited. The fighter she tracked to the rock formation made his move at 15:33. He came around the left side, and she knew he'd come around the left side because the right side put him uphill in exposed terrain, and he was trained well enough to avoid that. Left side, crouched low, moving fast. She was already at the left side when he arrived. 1 round. The slope went quiet again. 6 rounds left. 1 fighter unaccounted for. She shifted to her secondary position. 3 meters left slightly higher and began scanning. In the helicopter, Walker heard the shot. "That's her," he said. "One shot," Doyle said. "She's conserving. She's running low." Walker made a decision in approximately the time it takes to exhale. "Tran, I need that Apache. It's already vectoring to the northwest ridge on Hargrove's authorization." Tran's voice had a quality Walker had never heard from him before, a specific reluctance, like a man delivering news he wishes someone else had to deliver. "Commander, there's something else? Operations Center has been trying to raise Carter for the last 20 minutes on Hargrove's order." Walker went still. "Hargrove's order to what?" Tran didn't answer immediately. "What was the order, Chief?" "Withdraw," Tran said. "He ordered her to pull back. Said she was drawing fire, destabilizing the operation." The inside of the helicopter got very quiet. Not the quiet of shock. Some of the SEALs had been in this world long enough that very little produced shock. The quiet of people rapidly processing information and arriving at a specific collective conclusion that nobody voiced, because voicing it required a kind of anger that was not useful right now. Marcus Doyle spoke first, and he was careful. He ordered the only asset keeping us alive to stand down. "Yes," Tran said, "while we were actively taking casualties." "Yes." And she didn't comply. "She had her radio off. We can't confirm whether—" "She had her radio off on purpose," Walker said. His voice was still even, still controlled. The anger was there. He could feel it the way you feel barometric pressure change before a storm, the air getting heavy with something that hasn't happened yet. She made a decision. She knew what the order would be if it came through, and she made a different decision. He turned back to the door. "Get me that Apache. Now." Captain Renee Hollis in the Operations Center was doing something that represented the most significant professional risk she had taken in 9 years of military service. She was recording everything. Every timestamp, every transmission, every order and its corresponding data context. She was building with the systematic care of a person who understood that the truth was not self-documenting, a record of what had happened from the moment Colonel Hargrove ordered Carter to withdraw until the moment the SEAL team successfully boarded the extraction helicopter. She was not doing this to protect herself. She was doing it because she had watched in real time a commanding officer order the removal of the one element that was keeping 8 Americans alive. And she understood with complete clarity that if no record existed, the version of events that would be written in official documents would be the version that reflected best on the person with the highest rank in the room. She had seen this before. Not this exact situation, but this exact mechanism, the way institutional truth calcified around rank rather than around what actually happened. She had watched it happen to other people. She had told herself during those moments that she would not be complicit when it happened in front of her. So she recorded. And when Colonel Hargrove turned from the display at 15:36 and said with the tone of a man who has located a reasonable interpretation of events and is choosing to believe it, Carter's performance, while unauthorized, was ultimately consistent with the mission objectives. Hollis said nothing. She just kept recording. It was Ham 38. The Apache came over the ridge at an altitude that made the stones rattle. Olivia heard it before she saw it, the distinctive thudding percussion of rotors on mountain air, and she felt something she was not expecting to feel, which was relief. Not the frantic relief of a person who has been rescued, but the quieter, more complex relief of a person who has been holding a weight alone for a long time and suddenly senses someone else's hands reaching for it. She still had 1 fighter unaccounted for. She keyed her radio for the first time in 47 minutes. "Apache, this is Carter. I am on the southwest face of the secondary ridge grid." She gave the coordinates in the clipped, efficient format of someone who has done this before. "I have 1 hostile unlocated last seen below my position on the eastern approach to this shelf. Request you assist." A pause. Then a voice she didn't recognize, dry and professional. Carter, this is Ghost 3-1. We've been looking for you for 40 minutes. I know. Colonel Hargrove sends, I need eyes on that eastern approach. Another pause. Shorter this time. Roger that, Carter. Stand by. The Apache banked. She tracked it through her scope, not aiming, just watching, using the aircraft as a second pair of eyes covering ground. She couldn't see from her angle. She saw the moment the pilot found something, the slight adjustment in flight path the bank that said, I see it, without using words. Carter, your hostile is approximately 30 meters below your position, moving upslope on the eastern face. He has eyes on your last known location. He has not reacquired you yet. How much time do I have? 60 seconds, maybe less. Can you engage? He's in terrain that puts your position in the splash radius. Negative on direct engagement. Of course it was. Nothing about this day had offered clean options. What's he carrying? Rifle only, no launcher. She thought about this for exactly the amount of time she could afford. Then push him left, she said. Make noise on his right side, push him toward the open face. Give me a shot. Carter, that's 30 seconds now, she said. Are you going to push him or not? A beat. Stand by mine. The Apache dropped low on the eastern face, not directly at the fighter, but close enough that the rotor wash and the noise of the aircraft hit the right side of his position like a wall. She tracked the sound. She imagined his reaction, the instinctive movement away from the noise toward the only apparent cover, which was the open western face. He stepped into her sightline at 1540. She fired. 5 rounds left. The slope was quiet. She lowered the rifle and looked at her left hand for the first time. The wetness was blood. A fragment stone, she thought not metal, although the distinction felt academic at this particular moment, had opened a cut along the heel of her palm sometime in the past 30 minutes, and the cold had slowed the bleeding enough that she hadn't registered it until now. It wasn't serious. It wasn't even significantly painful. But her hand was shaking in a way that she was willing to now acknowledge had less to do with the cold than with the simple physical reality of a body that had been operating at maximum expenditure for the better part of an hour. She wrapped her hand with the field dressing from her vest pocket. She did it efficiently without excess attention. Then she started moving toward the extraction point. Walker saw her on the slope at 1544. She was moving in the angled, deliberate way of someone who is conserving energy because they have accurately estimated how much they have left and who is not going to waste a single step on anything except the most direct route to the next safe position. I was out of the helicopter before it had fully settled, which Tron was going to have opinions about later, and he covered the distance between the landing zone and her position with the specific urgency of a man who has had 47 minutes to think about what he was going to say when he got there, and has found that every version of it feels inadequate. She heard him coming. She didn't stop moving, but she turned her head enough to acknowledge him the way a person does when they hear someone call their name in a crowded room and they know who it is before they look. Carter, he said, Commander, you're bleeding. It's a scratch. It's handled. She kept moving. He fell in beside her. How's your team? Walker almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the first thing out of her mouth after she'd spent 47 minutes saving his team was a question about his team, and there was something in that which was both completely unsurprising and genuinely staggering. 3 injured, he said. Reyes needs surgery. Cho's stable. Kellerman, he paused. The pause said everything the word couldn't hold. She looked at him directly for the first time. Her eyes were clear, the kind of clear that costs something to maintain. I'm sorry, she said. He went fast, Walker said. He wasn't in pain. Neither of them said anything. Several steps. Then she said, I counted 8 of you on the helicopter. There were 8. Then the numbers worked. The numbers worked, he said, because of you. The numbers worked, she said, because your team kept fighting when they had no good reason to believe they had anything to fight toward. That's not me. That's them. Walker stopped walking. She went 2 more steps before she registered his absence, then stopped as well and turned. You had your radio off, he said. Yes. You knew there might be an order to pull back. I assessed the situation and made a decision based on what I could observe directly. Carter, she met his eyes. You saved my team, he said. Say that, just that. She was quiet for a moment. The wind moved across the ridge in the way it did here in these mountains, with the vast impersonal indifference of something that predates every human drama that has ever played out beneath it. I was in the right position, she said finally, with the right training. Walker looked at her for a long moment. Yeah, he said. I've heard that before. It's going to sound a lot less convincing when I'm putting your name in my report. They started walking again. In the operations center at 1551, Colonel Hargrove received the confirmation that the SEAL team was fully extracted and that Staff Sergeant Carter had been recovered by the Apache support crew and was en route to the forward operating base for medical evaluation. He stood for a moment with his hands clasped behind his back, studying the mission display. Call it complete, he said. Yes, sir, Hollis said. She entered the completion timestamp. Then she quietly saved every file she'd been compiling for the past 44 minutes to an external drive that she put in the breast pocket of her uniform. Not in a drawer, not in her bag, in her breast pocket directly against her chest where she would feel it if anyone asked for it. Captain Hargrove said without turning around, Sir, draft a preliminary report for higher command. Include Carter's engagement record. Frame it as adaptive overwatch in response to a rapidly deteriorating tactical situation. Hollis's fingers hovered over her keyboard. Adaptive overwatch, she repeated. Yes, not unauthorized engagement. Hargrove turned around. His expression was the specific blank of a senior officer who has decided on a narrative and is gauging whether his subordinates are going to cooperate with it. The mission succeeded, he said. The team came home. I see no reason to complicate that with administrative terminology that serves no one. Hollis looked at him. I'll draft the report, sir, she said. She began typing, but the external drive stayed in her breast pocket. And her own draft, the one that contained every timestamp and every recorded transmission and every order, Hargrove had given during the 47 minutes when Staff Sergeant Olivia Carter was the only thing standing between 8 SEAL operators and a body count, was saved somewhere that administrative terminology couldn't reach. The forward operating base medic's name was Specialist Torres, and he was 24 years old, which meant he had spent roughly a quarter of his life around soldiers who came back from places they couldn't describe to him in terms he'd recognize, and he had developed the useful professional habit of not asking questions that weren't medically relevant. When Carter came in, he looked at her hand, cleaned the laceration, checked her for shock indicators, and noted 2 other cuts she hadn't mentioned. One on her right forearm from what appeared to be rock fragment, one on her left shin that she'd been moving on for the past 20 minutes without any external acknowledgement. You need stitches on the palm, he said. Okay. Probably should have been done 40 minutes ago. I was busy. He worked in silence for a moment. Then he said, without looking up from the suturing, I heard what you did out there. She said nothing. Whole base heard, he said. Radio chatter, the Apache crew. She let him work. I'm not trying to make it weird, Torres said. I've stitched up a lot of people. Usually the ones who did something like that, they come in running on adrenaline, talking fast, can't sit still. He tied off a suture. You've been sitting completely still for 11 minutes. It's easier to stitch when the patient doesn't move, she said. He looked up at her. Is that the only reason? She looked down at her hand, at his careful, precise work, at the way the thread closed the wound in small, deliberate steps, each one restoring something that had been open. I know how to be still, she said. My father taught me. Torres went back to his work. Sounds like a good teacher, he said. She didn't answer. But something moved across her face in the quiet of the medical tent. Brief, private, the shadow of something she allowed herself for exactly as long as she could afford it, and then returned to the careful neutral that was how she wore her face in the world. He was, she said, and then she was still again. At 6:22, Walker appeared in the medical tent doorway. Torres looked up. 2 minutes, Walker said. If she's stable. Torres looked at Carter. Carter looked at Torres. She's stable, Torres said. 2 minutes. Walker came in and sat in the chair across from the treatment table, the kind of chair that existed in military medical facilities everywhere, without cushion, without consideration for the human body doing exactly the work of a chair and nothing more. He looked at her bandaged hand. He looked at her face. He looked briefly at the ceiling, which was canvas and which told him nothing, but which gave him a moment to organize the things he needed to say. Hargrove is calling it adaptive overwatch, he said. She absorbed this without visible reaction. Does that bother you, he said. It's accurate enough. It buries the fact that he ordered you to pull back. I know what it buries. Carter. Commander. Her voice was even. I made a decision without authorization. Whatever language goes in the report, that's the underlying fact. I'm not going to pretend I followed procedure because I didn't. You followed something better than procedure. That's not how the Army records it. Walker leaned forward. No, he said, but it's how 8 SEAL operators are going to remember it for the rest of their lives. And some things don't end up in the record. Those things still matter. She looked at him steadily. You came back for me, she said. Of course I did. You didn't have to. I know, he said. That's exactly why I did. The tent was quiet for a moment. Outside, the FOB was generating its constant low-noise vehicles. Voices, radio traffic, the compressed sound of a place where people were always moving between one crisis and the next. Kellerman had a daughter, she said. Walker looked at her. I know. 8 months old. How do you... He showed me a photo, morning of the mission, briefing room. She paused. He was trying to get the photo to stay in the pocket of his kit, and it kept sliding out, and I held it while he got the pocket to cooperate. She has his eyes. Walker said nothing. I don't know why I told you that, she said. I do, Walker said. She looked at him. Because you need someone to know, he said. Because you were out there alone for 47 minutes, carrying all of it, and that's what it costs. And now you need someone to carry just a piece of it with you. Olivia Carter, who had spent the entire day being the stillest person on the battlefield, who had absorbed everything, the mountain and the enemy, and the cold and the blood, and the impossible math of a 47-minute solo engagement, could throw at her, looked at Ethan Walker and said nothing. Because there was nothing left to say. And because sometimes the most profound thing that passes between two people is not a word. It is the precise moment when one of them stops being alone with something. She nodded once. He nodded back. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow's going to be complicated. She almost smiled, not quite, but close. They're all complicated, she said. She slept 4 hours. Not because 4 hours was enough, but because at the end of the 4th hour, something pulled her out of sleep with the specific urgency of a hand on a shoulder, and she had learned over the years not to argue with that particular signal. She sat up in the dark of the bunk room, oriented herself in under 3 seconds. Afghanistan FOB Kestrel East Wing, 2047 by the clock on the wall, and then stayed still for a moment, listening to the bass settle around her. Tomorrow's going to be complicated. That's what Walker had said. She had understood it as a kindness at the time, a warning dressed in understatement. Sitting in the dark now, she understood it as something more precise, an accurate forecast. She got up, wrapped her bandaged hand, and went to find coffee. She found Walker instead. I was in the briefing room at a table covered in paper, actual paper, the kind that didn't exist on a server somewhere, with a pen in his hand and the expression of a man who has been staring at the same sentence for longer than the sentence deserved. He looked up when she came in. 4 hours, he said. Enough, she said. It isn't. No, she agreed, but it's what I have. She poured coffee from the carafe on the side table. Dark, no sugar, the kind that tasted like it had been brewed sometime during the previous administration, and sat across from him without being invited because the situation did not require that kind of formality. What are you writing? She said. My incident report. He looked at the page. The honest one. She absorbed that. As opposed to, she said, as opposed to the one Hargrove is going to submit through official channels. He set the pen down. Hollis called me an hour ago. She's been building a parallel record since the engagement. Timestamps, transmissions, the withdrawal order, all of it. Carter wrapped both hands around her coffee mug and said nothing. She's going to file it separately, Walker said, through her own chain of command, which runs parallel to Hargrove's. It won't go in tonight and it won't make the initial report, but it'll exist. It'll be there when the review happens. If a review happens, Carter said. When, Walker said, I'm going to make sure of that. She looked at him over the rim of her mug. That's going to cost you something, she said. Probably. Hargrove has rank on you in relationships that go back. I know what he has, Walker said. I also know what I have. He picked up the pen again. I have 8 operators who came home because you didn't follow an order that should never have been given. That's a fact. Facts are harder to bury than people think, especially when 8 soldiers are all telling the same story. Carter set down her mug. I don't want this to become a thing, she said. Walker looked at her. It's already a thing, he said. It became a thing the moment he gave the order. So on 07:14, the following morning, Colonel Hargrove called Carter into his office. She had been expecting it. She knocked once entered on his instruction and stood in front of his desk in the precise posture that military service builds into a person's body, not rigid, not performative, but present, fully present, the way she stood behind her rifle. Hargrove studied her for a moment with the evaluating look of a man taking inventory. She let him look. At ease, he said, though she had not been at attention. She adjusted her stance slightly in acknowledgement of the instruction, without the pretense that it changed anything. Your engagement record from yesterday, Hargrove said. He opened a folder on his desk. He made a point of looking at it, of letting her see that he was looking at it. 14 confirmed engagements over a 47-minute operational window. Solo Overwatch, 1,100 meters maximum engagement distance. He turned a page. That's a remarkable performance, Staff Sergeant. Thank you, sir. It's also a performance that occurred entirely without authorization from this command. She held his gaze. I was unable to reach command during the engagement window, she said, because your radio was off. Because my radio being on would have compromised my position to an enemy force that had signals intercept capability. I made a tactical assessment. Hargrove leaned back in his chair. This was a specific posture she had seen before in men of his particular type, the lean that said, I am in control of the pace of this conversation, and I want you to know it. You made a tactical assessment, he repeated, without authorization. Yes, sir. And if your assessment had been wrong, if your engagement drew fire that resulted in additional casualties, she didn't hesitate. Then I would have been wrong, and I would own that outcome completely. But the assessment was based on observable facts. The machine gun on the North Ridge had fire superiority over the compound. The rocket team controlled the southern approach. Removing those elements was not optional for the team's survival. I had the capability and the position to remove them. Waiting for authorization would have taken time that those men did not have. Hargrove was quiet for a moment. You don't think you did anything wrong, he said. I think I violated procedure, she said. I don't think I made the wrong decision. The distinction landed in the room like something with weight. Hargrove closed the folder. My report will note your engagement as unauthorized but operationally effective, he said. You'll receive a written reprimand for the radio blackout and for independent action outside your assigned parameters. She said nothing. The reprimand will be on your record, he said. Yes, sir. That's my official position, Carter. I want you to understand that. She understood precisely what he was communicating. The reprimand was a shield not for her, for him. It was the official version of events that said the command had not endorsed her actions, which meant the command could not be held accountable for what those actions revealed about the order that preceded them. She was not going to make this easier for him. I understand your official position, sir, she said. Something moved across his face. Brief. Almost nothing. Dismissed, he said. She turned to leave. Carter. She stopped. You're an exceptional soldier, he said. The words came out with the quality of something that cost him more than he wanted to spend. That's not in question. She turned back just enough to look at him over her shoulder. No, sir, she said. It's not. She walked out. 0830, the SEAL team's debrief was supposed to be closed to support personnel. Supposed to be. Walker had made a specific request to the debrief officer, Lieutenant Colonel Dana Marsh, who ran after-action reviews with a reputation for the kind of rigorous precision that made people either respect her or avoid her, depending on their relationship with the truth that Carter be present. Marsh had considered this for approximately 4 seconds. She was a primary operational element, Walker said. She was assigned as support, Marsh said. She became a primary operational element, Walker said. The distinction matters for operational accuracy. Marsh looked at him. Is there something about this engagement that you believe the standard debrief structure won't capture? She said. Yes, he said. There are several things. Another pause. She's in the debrief, Marsh said. Carter sat at the end of the table when they filed in, which was the natural position for the lowest ranked person in the room. And also she had found the most informative position you could see everyone's face from the end of the table. What people said and what their faces did while they said it were often different. Marsh opened the session with the standard format timeline sequence of events. Contact report, and the SEALs moved through it with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this before and who knew that accuracy now prevented confusion later. Then Walker said, "I want to enter a formal record of Staff Sergeant Carter's engagement timeline." Marsh looked at him. "That's outside standard debrief scope for a support element," she said. "She wasn't functioning as a support element," Walker said. "She was the primary reason this team is sitting at this table instead of being written up in casualty reports." The room was quiet, Marcus Doyle said without inflection. "I concur with that assessment." Then one by one the other SEALs said it too. Not performed, not coordinated, just 6 men saying the same true thing in sequence because it was true. Marsh made a note. "Walk me through it, Staff Sergeant," she said. Carter walked her through it. Every engagement, every distance, every calculation, every decision point where she had a choice in what she chose and why. She did not editorialize. She did not present herself in any particular light. She simply described with the same precision she applied to the shooting itself what had happened and in what order. Marsh listened without interrupting. When Carter finished, the room stayed quiet for a moment. Then Marsh said, "You fired 14 engagements over 47 minutes solo from a static to shifting overwatch position with a compromised left hand for the final 20 minutes of the engagement." "Yes, ma'am." "Why didn't you report the hand injury?" "It wasn't operationally relevant. It was a combat wound. It was a laceration that didn't impair function at the level the engagement required." Marsh looked at her for a long moment. "You were ordered to withdraw," she said. The temperature in the room shifted by several degrees. "I received no direct order," Carter said carefully. "I had my radio on receive only. If a withdrawal order was transmitted, I did not receive it at the time of transmission." This was technically accurate. The order had been transmitted. She had not heard it directly. What she had anticipated was another matter, and it lived in a different category. The category of what she had known was coming and had made a structural decision to avoid receiving. Marsh understood the technical accuracy. She also understood what lived behind it. She wrote something in her notes. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant," she said. 10:15, Walker found Carter in the equipment bay running maintenance on her rifle with the focused attention of someone who cleaned their rifle, not as procedure, but as meditation. He sat across from her on an empty crate. "Marsh is requesting the engagement records from the operations center," he said. Carter kept working. "She's building a full picture," he continued, "timestamp by timestamp. She's good, Carter. She's not going to let this land where Hargrove wants it to land." "What Hargrove wants," Carter said without looking up, "is for yesterday to be filed as a mission that succeeded despite a subordinate's breach of protocol. Clean narrative. Nobody accountable for the order. The breach and the authorization are separated, and only the breach goes in the record. And what Marsh is building is a narrative where the order and the breach and the outcome are all in the same frame." "Yes." "You knew this was going to happen," Walker said. "When you turned that radio off, you knew the order was coming and you knew what would be required afterward." She looked up at him. "I knew what would happen if I turned the radio on," she said. "I made a decision about which consequence I could live with. A reprimand on your record. Men alive," she said. "That comes first. Everything else is paperwork." Walker looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his face that she recognized, not admiration exactly, because admiration had the quality of distance, of looking at something from outside. This was closer. The look of someone who has found a person who operates from the same fundamental premises they do, and the recognition of that creates a specific kind of gravity. "I want to nominate you for the Silver Star," he said. She went completely still. "Walker, I've already started the documentation. That will trigger a full review of every decision made during the engagement." "I know. Including Hargrove's." "I know that too." She looked at him steadily. "You're not doing this for me." "For me," she said. "It wasn't an accusation, it was an observation. I'm doing it for you and for every person who's ever been told to stand down when standing down meant letting people die," he said. "Those aren't separate things." She set down the cleaning cloth. She looked at the rifle. She thought about the hawk her father showed her holding position in wind that should have been pushing it sideways. "Patient wins. It'll cost you," she said. "You said that last night. It's still true this morning." "Yeah," he stood up. "Some costs are worth paying." He left her with the rifle in the quiet of the equipment bay, and she sat with what he'd said for a moment before picking up the cloth again. Some costs are worth paying. She had understood that truth for years. She had just never expected to have it said back to her. 11:47. The twist came from a direction nobody had anticipated. General Sandra Okafor, 2 stars, commander of Special Operations Forces, for the entire theater landed at FOB Kestrel in a helicopter that had not been on the day's manifest. Nobody announces a 2 stars arrival when the 2-star doesn't want to be announced. Okafor was 53 years old, compact, with the kind of physical presence that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with the specific quality of attention she gave the room when she walked into it. She had come up through military intelligence, transitioned to Special Operations Command, and had spent the better part of 2 decades developing a reputation for one specific thing. She showed up when something was wrong, and she didn't leave until she understood exactly what it was. She asked to see 3 people. In this order: Lieutenant Colonel Marsh, Lieutenant Commander Walker, Staff Sergeant Carter. The order was significant. Marsh first because she wanted the facts before she talked to the participants. Walker second because the team commander's account was the operational foundation. Carter third because the person at the center of a situation is almost never the one who can see it most clearly. And Okafor wanted to arrive at Carter having already assembled the architecture before she heard the account from inside it. Hargrove was not on her list. He found out about her arrival at 12:03 through his aide, who had heard from the Operations Center duty officer, and the specific quality of his silence. When he heard the name was the kind of silence that communicates to anyone watching carefully that a person's private calculations have just been disrupted at a fundamental level. He called his aide back 2 minutes later. "Get me Marsh," he said. "Sir Lieutenant Colonel Marsh is currently in a closed session with— I know where she is. Tell her I need 5 minutes before she briefs the general." There was a pause on the other end. "Sir, the session began approximately 20 minutes ago." Hargrove understood what he was being told. He was too late. Turn 18. General Okafor sat across from Carter in the same briefing room where Walker had been writing his report at 0400, and the quality of her attention was something Carter had not experienced often in her career. The specific attention of a person who is listening not to form a response, but to actually understand what they are hearing. "Start from when you made the decision to go radio silent," Okafor said. Carter started there. Okafor did not interrupt. She made occasional notes. When Carter reached the point where she described the decision not to withdraw, Okafor held up one hand. "Stop there," she said. Carter stopped. "You anticipated the withdrawal order." It wasn't a question. "I assessed that a withdrawal order was likely given the operational visibility from the command center and the standard risk calculus for solo overwatch elements," Carter said. "So you made a structural decision to be unreachable when the order came." Silence. "Yes, ma'am." Okafor leaned back. "That's a significant thing to admit," she said. "I'm aware. Most people in your position would hide behind the tactical explanation. Signals intercept risk, maintaining position integrity, all of which were legitimate factors." Okafor's eyes were steady on her. "You're not hiding behind them." "They were real factors," Carter said. "They were also not the only factors." "What were the other factors?" Carter looked at her. 8 Americans were going to die if I moved or went silent," she said. "That was the primary factor. Everything else was secondary." Okafor was quiet for a moment. "The reprimand Hargrove filed this morning," she said. "How do you feel about it?" "It's accurate," Carter said. "I acted without authorization. The reprimand reflects that. It also buries the order that preceded your decision." "Yes, ma'am." "Does that bother you?" The question landed in the room with unusual weight. Not the weight of rank, not the weight of consequence, but the weight of a person who genuinely wanted to know the answer and was giving Carter the space to give it honestly. "What bothers me," Carter said slowly, "is not the reprimand on my record. A reprimand is paper. What bothers me is the possibility that the order gets filed away as a footnote, and the next time a similar situation develops, the same decision gets made by someone who doesn't have my radio on his team's frequency." Okafor said nothing. "People will die," Carter said. "Not because of the reprimand, because of the framework the reprimand protects. That's what I can't live with." Okafor wrote something in her notebook, took her time doing it. When she looked up, something in her expression had shifted, not dramatically, not in any way that a person without considerable experience reading rooms would have caught. But Carter caught it. "I'm going to ask you a question that is off the official record," Okafor said. "You don't have to answer it." Carter nodded. "Were you afraid up there?" Carter considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Not the way people usually mean when they ask that," she said. "I wasn't afraid of dying. I've had enough time with that particular fact that it doesn't disrupt my function." She paused. "I was afraid of missing. I was afraid of the specific moment where I make an error and the man I was trying to protect pays for it. That fear, I've kept it for a long time. It keeps me honest." Okafor studied her. "Your father was a competitive marksman," she said. Carter blinked. "How did you—" "I read personnel files before I have conversations," Okafor said. "Yours is more interesting than most." She closed her notebook. "He died 2 years ago." "Yes, ma'am." "He never saw you shoot in the field." "No." "Does that sit hard with you?" Carter was quiet for a moment. "He knew what I was," she said finally. "He didn't need to see it. He built it." Okafor nodded once. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant," she said. "You can go." Carter came to attention, turned to leave. "Carter." She stopped. "The Silver Star nomination Walker filed this morning," Okafor said. "I've read the documentation." A pause. "It's thorough." Carter said nothing. "The review it triggers is going to be uncomfortable for a number of people," Okafor said. "Some of them outrank you considerably." "I know, ma'am." "Does that concern you?" Carter turned back just enough to meet the general's eyes. "I was on a ridge for 47 minutes making decisions without a net," she said. "A review with uncomfortable questions is significantly easier than that." Okafor looked at her for a long moment. Something almost like a smile moved across her face, brief as light through a closing door. "Yes," she said. "I imagine it is." By 13:45, Hargrove requested a meeting with Okafor. He was told the general's schedule was full for the afternoon. He requested again at 14:00. Full. At 14:30, he stopped requesting and called his counterpart at command, a man who had known him for 19 years, who owed him a favor from a situation that had never been officially documented, and who would understand what Hargrove was asking for when he picked up the phone. The call lasted 6 minutes. When it ended, Hargrove sat at his desk for a long moment. The thing about a 27-year career was that you accumulated things, rank, relationships, credibility, the small, invisible architecture of favors extended and received. It felt most of the time like weight in the good sense, the kind of weight that kept you anchored. It felt occasionally like the other kind. He pulled up the draft of his incident report on his screen. He read it through, then he read it again. The language was precise and defensible. Adaptive overwatch. Operationally effective, unauthorized, independent action mitigated by outcome. It was the version of the truth that protected the institution and also functionally protected him. He thought about Walker's 8 operators. He thought about Specialist Kellerman's daughter. I thought about Staff Sergeant Carter sitting in front of him this morning, holding his gaze with the specific quality of attention of someone who did not need his validation. He thought about Okafor landing in an unmarked helicopter. He closed the draft without saving changes. He opened a new document. He stared at the blank page for a long moment. Then he started typing something different. 16 now, Walker found Carter on the base's eastern perimeter, sitting on a concrete barrier with her back to the base, looking at the mountains. She heard him coming. She didn't look around. He sat beside her. For a while, neither of them said anything. The mountains did what mountains do, which was exist with the massive indifference of things that have been there for longer than any human drama and will be there after all of them are gone. Carter had always found that indifference clarifying rather than depressing. You couldn't perform for mountains. They didn't care. Okafor requested Hargrove's original draft, Walker said. Not the revision, the original. How do you know there was a revision? Hollis, she's been monitoring the document edits on the command server. He paused. Hargrove rewrote his incident report 40 minutes ago. Carter turned to look at him. What's in the new version, she said. Hollis only got a fragment before he locked it for submission. But what she got included a line that was not in the original draft. Walker looked at her steadily. It referenced the withdrawal order. The air between them changed. He put it in, she said. Not a question, the tone of someone trying to establish the reality of an unexpected fact. He referenced it, Walker said carefully. Hollis doesn't have the full context. We don't know how it's framed, but he put it in the record. Carter turned back to the mountains. She held this information for a moment. Why, she said, I don't know. Speculation. Walker thought about it. Okafor, he said, she has a way of arriving at a situation and making a person understand that the window for managing their own narrative is exactly as wide as she allows it to be. And she doesn't allow it to be very wide. He's protecting himself, Carter said, getting ahead of whatever Marsh's report contains. Maybe, Walker said, or maybe he sat in that office this afternoon and did a calculation that had nothing to do with self-protection. He paused. I've known Hargrove for 6 years. He's not a bad officer. He made a bad call. Those aren't always the same person. Carter looked at him. You're being generous. I'm being accurate, Walker said. The order was wrong. That's a fact. Whether the man who gave it is capable of knowing it was wrong, that's a different question, and the answer matters for what comes next. She was quiet for a moment. Kellerman's wife, she said. Does she know yet? Walker nodded. The notification team went this morning, he said. Carter looked at the mountains. She thought about a photograph of a girl with her father's eyes sliding out of a vest pocket in a briefing room on the morning of a mission that not everyone came home from. She's going to raise that child alone, Carter said. Yes. And that child is going to grow up and ask questions about her father. Yes. And the answers she gets are going to depend on what goes in the record. Carter turned to Walker. That's what this is about. Not me, not Hargrove, not Okafor's investigation. It's about whether the record of this day is honest, because someday a little girl is going to read it. Walker looked at her for a long moment. Then we make sure it's honest, he said. How? We tell the truth, he said. Completely, every one of us. Walker Doyle, the whole team. Marsh, Hollis, Okafor. We tell exactly what happened in the order it happened, and we don't let anyone smooth the edges for institutional comfort. Carter looked at him. That's a fight, she said. Yes, it is. Against people with considerably more rank. Yes. And you are prepared for that. Walker met her eyes. I came back for you on a ridge in eastern Afghanistan, he said. Compared to that, a fight over paperwork seems pretty manageable. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something she didn't say often because it was not in her nature to spend words on things that she felt could be expressed through action. Thank you, she said. He nodded. Get your rest, he said. Okafor is convening a formal review board tomorrow morning at 0800. You're the first witness. He stood up from the barrier. He started walking back toward the base. She stayed where she was for another few minutes, looking at the mountains, doing the thing she did when she needed to prepare for something that required everything she had, which was to be completely still, to breathe with deliberate slowness, to let the noise of expectation and consequence and other people's decisions settle to the bottom of her awareness like sediment in disturbed water. Until what remained at the surface was clear. Until what remained was only the essential thing. The truth undecorated without the comfort of framing, and the specific quiet courage of someone preparing to speak it out loud in a room full of people who had significant professional incentives to hear something else. She breathed. She was still. She was ready. The review board convened at 0800 sharp, and the room it convened in was not large enough for what it contained. General Okafor sat at the head of the table. To her left, Lieutenant Colonel Marsh with 2 inches of printed documentation and a laptop she had not closed since the previous evening. To her right, a JAG officer named Major Priya Anand, who specialized in operational law and who had arrived on the same unmarked helicopter as Okafor, which told Walker everything he needed to know about how seriously the general had been taking this before she ever landed. Hargrove sat on the witness side of the table. He had arrived 3 minutes early, which was the behavior of a man who understood that arriving late would be interpreted as avoidance, and that the only move available to him now was to sit in the room and face whatever the room produced. Walker sat 2 chairs down from Hargrove, which was close enough to feel the tension radiating off the man and far enough to be clear about which side of the table he was on. Carter sat at the end. Same position as the debrief, same reason. Okafor opened without preamble. This board is convening to establish a complete operational record of the engagement at grid reference November Kilo 77 on the 14th from first contact at 1447 through full extraction at 1551. We are not here to assign blame, We are here to establish fact. Every person in this room will be asked questions. Every answer will be recorded. If the facts lead somewhere uncomfortable, we follow them there anyway. She looked around the table. Are we clear? Everyone said yes. Colonel Hargrove, Okafor said, you submitted a revised incident report yesterday afternoon. The revision included a reference to a withdrawal order issued to Staff Sergeant Carter at approximately 15:10 during the engagement. Walk me through the decision to issue that order. The room went very quiet. Hargrove placed both hands flat on the table. It was a deliberate gesture. Carter thought the gesture of a man who has decided to stop holding himself together with tension and is making a structural choice to be open instead. I issued the order, he said, because I assessed Carter as a destabilizing element. Solo overwatch at that distance, drawing enemy attention, operating without direct command oversight. From a pure risk management standpoint, the decision to pull her back was defensible. Defensible, Okafor said. By the standard framework, yes. And by the non-standard framework, Hargrove's jaw tightened. By the actual outcome framework, he said it was wrong. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped from a height. Walker looked at Hargrove, genuinely looked, not the tactical observation of a man monitoring an opponent, but the direct look of a person who has just heard something unexpected from a source he had stopped expecting it from. Hargrove didn't look back. He was looking at Okafor, which was the right place to look. I made an assessment based on standard parameters, Hargrove said. The standard parameters did not account for what Carter was actually accomplishing in real time. I didn't have full situational awareness of her engagement impact. And when I gave the order, he paused. I didn't wait to get it. Major Annan was writing. Marsh was writing. Okafor said, what do you mean you didn't wait? I mean, I made the call faster than the situation warranted. I saw a support element operating without authorization at extreme distance, and I reacted to the protocol violation instead of to the operational reality. He looked at his hands. That's the honest version. Thank you for the honest version, Okafor said. She made a note. Staff Sergeant Carter. Carter looked up. When you describe your decision to go radio silent, you characterize it as a tactical assessment. I want to ask you something more specific. Okafor's eyes were steady. At the moment you made that decision, did you know the withdrawal order was coming? The room held its breath. Carter had prepared for this question. She had prepared for it on the eastern perimeter the previous afternoon in the dark before she slept, and again at 0600 this morning when she had been awake for an hour before anyone else in the bunk room stirred. She had prepared for it, and she had arrived at only one available answer. I assessed it as likely, she said, based on my understanding of standard protocol and my assessment of how my engagement would appear from command's position. Yes. I believed a withdrawal order was probable, and you structured your radio posture to avoid receiving it. I structured my radio posture to avoid signals intercept by an enemy force with demonstrated SIGINT capability, she said. The effect of that posture was that I was unreachable for direct orders during the engagement window. Carter, Okafor's voice was not unkind, but it was precise. I asked you whether you structured your radio posture to avoid the order, not what the tactical justification was. Both things can be true simultaneously. A long silence. Yes, Carter said, both things were true simultaneously. Hargrove looked at her then, the first time he had looked directly at her since the board convened. His expression was not what she expected. It was not resentment, not the defensiveness of a superior officer watching a subordinate confirm testimony that reflected badly on his command decision. It was something closer to recognition, the look of someone watching another person do the thing that he himself had just done, which was to stop managing the narrative and just say what was true. He looked away. Okafor wrote something. Then she said, I want to hear from Lieutenant Commander Walker about the moment he understood what Carter was doing from the ridge. 9:23, Walker talked for 18 minutes. He talked about the machine gun nest going silent and the specific quality of the silence, not the silence of a gun that jams which has a different texture, but the silence of a gun whose operator is no longer capable of operating it. He talked about recognizing that the pattern of engagements being neutralized was not random, that there was a logic to the sequence that indicated a single shooter working through a priority list that matched almost exactly what a trained tactical mind would identify as the critical nodes of the ambush. He talked about what it felt like from inside a compound with 3 wounded men and 4 magazines of ammunition to feel the pressure of an attack that should have been unstoppable begin to yield. He talked about telling the pilot they weren't lifting. "You delayed extraction for a wounded team," Anon said. She wasn't accusing, she was establishing fact. "I delayed extraction for 40 seconds, Walker said. The rotors were turning. The wounded were on board. We had gained enough breathing room from Carter's final engagements on the helicopter approach that a 40-second delay was tactically acceptable. And if it hadn't been tactically acceptable," Walker met Anon's eyes. "Then I would have made a different call," he said. "But it was, and Carter was still on that ridge. We don't leave people on ridges." 10:05. Marcus Doyle's testimony lasted 11 minutes and contained 0 unnecessary words. He described what he had observed. He described it in sequence. He described with the flat precision of a man who has processed difficult facts completely and is now simply reporting them the moment at 15:17 when a coordinated enemy push on the southwest corner faltered because 2 of its 4 elements were simultaneously eliminated from a position the enemy had not yet located. "In your assessment," Okafor said, "what was the decisive factor in the team's survival?" Doyle didn't hesitate. "Carter," he said, more specifically. "Carter's decision to stay on that ridge when she had every tactical reason to leave it," Doyle said. "She had enemy hunters on her slope. She had used most of her ammunition. She had a compromised hand. She had no air support and no communication with command. By every standard risk calculation, she should have withdrawn and gone dark and waited for extraction." He paused. "She didn't, and we're alive." The board was quiet. "One more question, Sergeant Doyle," Okafor said. "In your 11 years of operational service, have you encountered another soldier who performed comparably under equivalent conditions?" Doyle thought about it. The thinking was genuine. She could see him actually running through the catalog of 11 years, which was a long catalog with significant entries. "No," he said, "I have not." 10:44. The twist that reconfigured everything arrived in the form of a manila envelope. Captain Hollis brought it in person. She knocked, was admitted, and placed it on the table in front of Okafor without preamble. "I apologize for the interruption, General," she said. "This arrived from SOCOM archives 30 minutes ago in response to a records request I submitted yesterday morning. I assessed it as time-sensitive to these proceedings." Okafor looked at the envelope. "What records request?" Hargrove said. His voice was controlled, but something in it was not. "I submitted a request for Carter's full operational jacket," Hollis said, "including classified performance records from prior assignments. Carter's jacket is not relevant to—" "Colonel," Okafor's voice was quiet. The specific quiet that does not require volume to establish authority. "Captain Hollis is submitting records to an active review board at my request. I'll determine what is and isn't relevant." Hargrove went silent. Okafor opened the envelope. She read for approximately 90 seconds. The room watched her read. Whatever she was reading, it was doing something to her expression. Not dramatically, not in the way that telegraphs itself across a face for everyone to see, but in the subtle way of a person whose internal framework is being revised by incoming information. She set the documents down. She looked at Carter. "Staff Sergeant," she said, "Ma'am, your assignment to this operation was listed as Standard Support Overwatch." "Yes, ma'am." "Your prior assignment was listed as—" Okafor glanced at the documents, "Tactical Reconnaissance, classified with a performance rating of exceptional across 4 consecutive evaluation cycles." "Yes, ma'am." "Before that, you completed a joint program with Naval Special Warfare that is listed in your jacket under a classification level that I'm not going to read aloud in this room." The temperature in the room changed. Walker looked at Carter. Carter was looking at Okafor with the careful stillness of someone who knew that the architecture of a conversation had just shifted and was measuring how much of the new structure they were willing to support. "I've had a varied career," she said. "Staff Sergeant," Okafor's voice was not impatient, but it was exact. "The program listed in your jacket trained 14 individuals in a Joint Special Operations Sniper doctrine that combined Naval Special Warfare precision engagement methodology with Army reconnaissance and direct action capabilities. Of the 14 who entered that program, 7 completed it. Of the 7 who completed it, your performance was rated highest in the cohort." Silence. "Why?" Okafor said. were you assigned to this operation as standard support overwatch? Carter said nothing. Carter, B. Walker said. It was barely above a whisper. She looked at him briefly, then back at Okafor. I requested the assignment, she said. You requested a demotion from your actual operational classification. I requested an assignment that matched what the team needed. The team needed a support overwatch element. Yes, ma'am. Not a Tier 1 precision engagement specialist. The assignment as written was support overwatch, Carter said. I filled it as written. Okafor looked at her for a long, deliberate moment. And when the situation exceeded the parameters of the assignment as written, she said, you filled it as needed. Yes, ma'am. Using capabilities that were not listed in your assignment profile. I used the capabilities the situation required. Okafor turned to Hargrove. Colonel, she said, were you aware of Carter's full operational background when you issued the withdrawal order? The room was very quiet. Hargrove looked at Carter, really looked at her, not the inventory look from yesterday morning, but something more complete. The look of a man who is revising an assessment in real time and is honest enough to let the revision show. No, he said, I was not. Would it have changed your assessment? A pause. I don't know, he said, and then after a beat, it should have. Okafor set the documents aside. We'll take a 15-minute recess, she said, quote. 11:02. In the hallway, Walker caught up with Carter before she reached the water station. You requested the assignment, he said. Yes. Why didn't you tell anyone what you actually were? She looked at him. She had the expression of someone who has been carrying a thing for long enough that the weight of it has become normal, and being asked about the weight is both a relief and a kind of exposure. Because it creates expectations, she said. The moment someone knows your full profile, they assign you missions based on the profile instead of the situation. I wanted to assess the situation first, decide what it needed, fill that. You were protecting your ability to make independent judgments, Walker said. I was preserving operational flexibility. Carter, that's the same thing. She was quiet. I've been doing this for 9 years, she said. I've watched what happens when a soldier gets a reputation that precedes them into every room they enter. People stop seeing the soldier. They see the reputation. They make decisions about what that soldier should do based on a profile that might be 2 years out of date. She looked at him steadily. I prefer to be underestimated. It gives me room to work. Walker absorbed this. Hargrove underestimated you, he said. Yes. And if he'd known your actual profile, he might not have issued the withdrawal order. Or, she said, he might have issued it faster. Because a high-profile asset-drawing enemy, attention is an even bigger liability concern than a standard Overwatch element. She shook her head. You can't know. That's the point. The profile cuts both ways. Walker looked at her. Okafor knows your full profile now, he said. Yes. That's going to change how this board resolves. I know. Is that what you wanted? She thought about it. What I wanted, she said, was for 8 men to get on a helicopter alive. Everything after that is consequences I'm willing to manage. Walker looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something that he hadn't planned to say, that arrived without calculation the way true things sometimes do. You're the best soldier I've ever worked with, he said. She looked at him. You've worked with exceptional people, she said. I know who I've worked with, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, ask me again after the board. 10:11-18. The board reconvened and Okafor moved with the efficiency of a person who has identified the destination and is no longer interested in the scenic route. I want to address the record as it currently stands, she said. Colonel Hargrove has submitted a revised incident report acknowledging the withdrawal order. Captain Hollis has provided timestamp documentation supporting a comprehensive operational timeline. Lieutenant Colonel Marsh has compiled an engagement analysis that has been verified against the Apache crew's gun camera footage. She paused. And Staff Sergeant Carter's operational jacket has revealed a background that was not communicated to the operational command during mission planning. She looked around this table. That last fact is relevant in 2 directions, she said. First, Carter's capabilities exceeded what the assigned command knew they were working with, which limited their ability to make fully informed decisions during the engagement. Second, Carter's choice to request a standard assignment rather than a specialized one was a personal operational judgment, And I wanted to be clear that I am not treating it as a procedural failure on her part. Hargrove looked at his hands. However, Okafor continued, the withdrawal order is a different matter. Regardless of Carter's classification level, the operational reality, at the time the order was issued, was observable in real time from the command center's data feeds. Machine gun suppression on the compound had ceased. Rocket positions had been neutralized. The team's tactical situation was improving visibly. She set down her pen. The order to withdraw was issued without full account of the observable operational impact of the element being ordered to withdraw. That is a command failure independent of Carter's profile. Hargrove didn't dispute it. I'm not issuing findings today, Okafor said. This board's formal conclusions will follow the complete evidentiary review, which will take 2 weeks. What I am doing today is entering a preliminary operational assessment into the theater record. She picked up her pen. The engagement at grid reference November Kilo 77 on the 14th represents one of the most operationally significant solo precision engagements in this theater in the past 7 years. The outcome 8 operators extracted alive, including 3 with critical wounds, was directly attributable to one individual's decision to remain in a position of maximum risk and continue executing a mission that exceeded her assigned parameters. The room was completely still. Staff Sergeant Carter, Okafor said, "Ma'am, this board's preliminary assessment will reflect your actions accurately and completely, not as a breach of protocol with a positive outcome, as a demonstration of tactical judgment, physical courage, and operational commitment under conditions that most experienced soldiers would have assessed as untenable." Carter absorbed this. "The reprimand Hargrove filed," she said, "will be reviewed in context of the complete record," Okafor said. "What does that mean in practical terms?" "It means the review board makes a determination about whether the reprimand reflects the facts as established by this board. If it doesn't, the record is corrected." Okafor met her eyes. "That's how the process is supposed to work, Staff Sergeant. It doesn't always, but when I'm running it, it does." Carter looked at her. Something moved in Carter's chest that she didn't immediately have a name for. It wasn't relief. Relief was too simple, too complete. It was something more complicated, the specific feeling of a person who has been carrying a weight in isolation and has just found that the floor under them is solid enough to set it down. She said, "What happens to Hargrove?" The question surprised the room. She could see it, the slight adjustments in posture, the brief eye movements that meant people were recalibrating their assessment of her based on the fact that the first thing she asked about once her own record was secured was the fate of the man who had ordered her to stand down. Okafor studied her for a moment. "That's not something I can discuss with you," she said. "With respect, ma'am, I'm not asking because I want him punished," Carter said. "I'm asking because I don't." The room went very quiet. "He made a wrong call," Carter said. "He made it faster than the situation warranted, which he acknowledged himself this morning. And then he sat in that chair and told the truth about it when he didn't have to." She looked at Okafor directly. "That matters. Whatever the record says about the order, it should also say that. Because the kind of officer who can look at his own decision and say, 'I was wrong,' that's not nothing. That's actually something." Okafor held her gaze for a long moment. "Noted," she said, and she wrote it down. 13:30. The board concluded its session in the hallway outside the briefing room held a specific quality of post-pressure silence, the kind that exists when a room full of people have been tightly wound for hours and have just been released from the obligation of maintaining that tension. Hargrove came out third. He stopped when he saw Carter. She was standing by the water station, bandaged hand wrapped around a paper cup, not looking at anything in particular. He walked toward her. She watched him come. He stopped a few feet away. He was a large man, and the hallway was not, which meant the distance was smaller than either of them might have chosen, but neither of them moved. "What you said in there," he said, "about wanting me to be heard fairly." She waited. "I don't know why you did that," he said. "Yes, you do," she said. He was quiet. "Because I'm not here to bury people," she said. "I'm here to keep people alive. That applies to missions, and it applies to this hallway." She looked at him steadily. "You made a wrong call. You said so. If you can live with having said it, the board can live with having heard it." Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. And it was a man who had spent 27 years building an edifice of command, authority, and something in the architecture of that edifice had shifted in the past 24 hours had been rearranged by the specific pressure of events that required honesty rather than management. And he was standing in a hallway looking at a staff sergeant who was half his age and had just said something that would take him a long time to fully absorb. "You're going to be the most decorated soldier in this theater inside a year," he said. She looked at him. "I don't need decorations," she said. "I know." He almost smiled. The almost was the most human thing she had seen from him in 2 days. "That's why you're going to get them." He walked away. She stood in the hallway, paper cup in hand, and let the silence of the afternoon settle around her. Her hand ached. Her shoulder ached. The cuts on her forearm and shin ached with the specific insistence of injuries that were no longer in competition with adrenaline for the body's attention. She noted all of it and set it aside. She thought about tomorrow. She thought about the formal findings in 2 weeks. She thought about a review process that was going to examine with uncomfortable precision the decision architecture of a 47-minute engagement that had become, without anyone planning it that way, a referendum on how the military treated the people it underestimated. She thought about a little girl with her father's eyes. She thought about a hawk holding position and wind. Patient wins. She finished her water. She went to find Walker. Walker was in the equipment bay when she found him doing something she hadn't expected, sitting on the same crate where she'd cleaned her rifle that morning. Not doing anything in particular, just sitting with his hands loose between his knees and his eyes on the middle distance that soldiers stare into when they're processing something that hasn't finished processing yet. He heard her coming and looked up. "How'd it go with Hargrove?" he said. "Better than it should have," she said. "What does that mean?" She sat across from him. "It means he said something almost human on his way out of the door." Walker looked at her. "And you said something almost human back." "Probably," he almost smiled. "You defended him in there. I want to know why." She considered the question with the seriousness she gave everything. "Because the record matters more than the outcome for any one person in it," she said. "If the board's findings make Hargrove a villain and me a hero, that's a clean story, and it's also a false one. What actually happened is messier than that. A man made a fast call under pressure without full information and then sat in a room and admitted it. That's not villainy, that's humanity. And the record should reflect both." Walker was quiet for a moment. "You know, most people in your position would have let him burn," he said. "Most people in my position weren't raised by a competitive marksman who spent 12 years drilling into them that accuracy means the whole truth, not the flattering parts of it." Walker looked at the ceiling. "Your father sounds like he was a remarkable man," he said. "How was a stubborn, infuriating, brilliant man," she said. "He was right about almost everything, and he knew it, which made him difficult to live with and impossible to forget." Walker came back down from the ceiling. "The board findings come out in 2 weeks," he said. "Okafor's preliminary assessment goes into the theater record tonight. The Silver Star nomination is formally submitted and under active review." He looked at her. "That's a significant amount of institutional machinery in motion because of 47 minutes on a ridge." "The 47 minutes on the ridge were the easy part," she said. "I knew what I was doing up there. All the machinery you're describing, that's the part I don't entirely know how to navigate." "You navigated it fine today." "Today was a board with Okafor running it," she said. "Okafor is exceptional. Not every room has an Okafor." "No," Walker said, "but some rooms have you." She looked at him. He meant it plainly without elaboration, in the way that he said true things directly without dressing them up in language that made them easier to dismiss. She let it stand. 14:16. 2 things happened simultaneously in the late afternoon that neither Walker nor Carter knew about yet, and that would define the shape of the next 2 weeks in ways neither of them was expecting. The first thing, General Okafor, in her temporary office at FOB Kestrel, made a phone call to a 3-star at the Pentagon whose name was not in any document Carter had ever seen, and who had, over the course of a career that predated Carter's enlistment by 15 years, built a particular reputation for paying attention to specific kinds of situations. The situations where an institution's formal response to an event was in danger of being significantly less honest than the event itself warranted. The call lasted 19 minutes. Okafor spoke for 12 of them. At the end, the 3-star said, "Send me the jacket." Okafor sent it within the hour. The second thing, Marcus Doyle in the team communications room was writing an email that he had been composing in his head since the previous afternoon and that he was now putting into words with the careful attention of a man who understands that some communications are permanent in a way that verbal exchanges are not. I was writing to the Special Operations Community newsletter, the unofficial one, the one that circulated among active and veteran Special Operations personnel, and that had over the 20 years of its existence broken stories about personnel and operations that official channels had buried, sanitized, or simply ignored. He was not writing anything classified. I was writing about what it felt like to be pinned inside a compound with 3 wounded men and 4 magazines of ammunition, and to feel the pressure of an attack that should have killed you begin to yield because someone on a distant ridge had decided not to leave. He didn't use Carter's name. He didn't use specific operational details. He described only the experience, the subjective, human, unclassifiable experience of receiving help you had stopped expecting from a source you couldn't see. He titled it The Shooter on the Ridge. He submitted it at 14:47, which was without him consciously planning it, that way the exact time the ambush had triggered the previous day. The 2 weeks that followed moved with the specific quality of time that is both too slow and too fast, simultaneously slow in the granular day-to-day of waiting for institutional machinery to produce its output, fast in the accumulating weight of what that machinery was revealing. The board's formal findings were released on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after the engagement, and they were more comprehensive than anyone outside Okafor's inner circle had anticipated. Carter was in a recovery billet at the main FOB when Walker brought her the summary. He sat across from her and read key sections aloud, not because she couldn't read them herself, but because some documents warrant a witness. The findings established in formal institutional language that had been built to last the following: that Staff Sergeant Olivia Carter had performed a solo precision engagement of 14 confirmed targets over 47 minutes under conditions that the board characterized as operationally extraordinary, that her actions had been the decisive factor in the survival of 8 naval special warfare operators, that the withdrawal order issued during the engagement had been premature and insufficiently informed, and that the reprimand filed against Carter was inconsistent with the complete operational record and was to be expunged. Walker stopped reading there. Carter was looking at the wall. Expunged, she said. Yes. The whole reprimand? Yes. She was quiet for a moment. How's Reyes? She said. Walker blinked. Then he recognized the move, Carter redirecting toward the thing that actually mattered to her, which was never the document and always the people. Surgery went well, he said. He's at Landstuhl. They expect full recovery. Cho, home in San Diego, walking without assistance. She nodded. And Kellerman's wife, she said. Sarah, Walker said. Her name is Sarah. The daughter is Emma. He paused. The SEAL teams have a casualty assistance program. She's being supported. I know about the program, Carter said. I want to know how she is. Walker looked at her. I called her, he said, 2 days ago. Carter looked up. I told her what her husband did, Walker said, that he fought with everything he had right up to the end, that he wasn't alone, that his team didn't leave him behind. He paused. And I told her that the reason we were alive to fight beside him as long as we did was because of someone who made a decision not to let us die without a fight. Did you tell her who? I told her there was a soldier on a ridge who stayed when she didn't have to, he said. That's all. The rest, he gestured at the document. The rest is going to be public eventually. She'll find out everything eventually. But the thing I wanted her to know first was that her husband died in the company of people who valued his life enough to risk their own for it. Carter held his gaze for a long moment. Thank you, she said. You gave me something to tell her, he said. That's the other direction of the same gratitude. Day 13. Doyle's essay in the Special Operations newsletter had done something that informal publications occasionally do, and that official channels almost never anticipated had spread. Not in the viral, undiscriminating way of general media. In the specific, targeted way of something that travels through a community that recognizes itself in what it's reading. Veterans shared it. Active personnel passed it through encrypted channels that weren't supposed to carry personal content, but did anyway because some things transcend the policy that technically prohibits them. The essay asked no questions. It stated no names. It made no argument. It simply described the experience of being saved by someone who had chosen to stay, And it asked in the final paragraph a question that its readers couldn't stop thinking about. How many times have we ordered the person who was saving us to stop? By day 13, the essay had been read by an estimated 40,000 people. By day 13, Olivia Carter's name had not appeared in any public document. By day 13, everyone in the special operations community knew exactly who the shooter on the ridge was. Day 14, Okafor called Carter into the same temporary office where she'd conducted her initial interview. Carter sat across from the general and observed that Okafor looked like a person who had spent the intervening 2 weeks in a series of conversations that had consumed significant quantities of political capital and that she had not found this expenditure regrettable. The Silver Star is confirmed, Okafor said. Carter absorbed this. The ceremony will be here at Phoebe Kestrel in 5 days. Commander Walker will present. I will attend. Okafor looked at her directly. This is not optional. I understand, ma'am. I want to talk to you about something else, Okafor said. She leaned forward slightly. I've been in a number of conversations over the past 2 weeks about your operational profile and your future assignment. I want to be direct with you about what's being discussed. Carter said nothing. She gave Okafor the specific quality of attention that meant she was listening with everything. There are people at the command level, Okafor said, who want to place you in a role that matches your full operational classification. Tier 1 precision engagement, joint special operations, the complete picture. High visibility, high demand, maximum institutional investment in your capabilities. She paused. There are also people who want to use what happened here as a case study, not just in precision engagement, but in command decision-making. In the specific failure mode that almost cost us 8 operators and cost us 1. She let that land. Both of those futures involve you becoming considerably more visible than you have been. I've been visible for 47 minutes, Carter said. I prefer the other kind. I know, Okafor said, which is why I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what's available, and I'm asking you what you want. Carter was quiet for a moment. What I want, she said slowly, is not a Tier 1 assignment where someone else's profile of me determines what I'm used for before I walk in the door. She looked at Okafor steadily. And it's not a case study where I become the lesson plan instead of the person. Then what? I want to teach, Carter said. Okafor held very still. Not case studies, Carter continued. Not after-action analysis sitting in a room somewhere explaining what I did and why. I mean actual instruction. The programs that produce the people who end up in positions like the one I was in on that ridge, the marksmanship curriculum, the decision-making under stress protocols, the tactical assessment training that determines whether a soldier in an impossible situation makes a call that works or a call that doesn't. She leaned forward slightly. I've been doing this for 9 years. I've made every mistake that can be made, and I've learned from all of them. And the most useful thing I can do with that, more useful than any Tier 1 deployment, is give it to the next generation before they have to learn it the hard way. Okafor was quiet. That's not a high visibility role, she said. No, ma'am. It's not the role people are expecting for you after what happened on that ridge. No. You'd be walking away from a momentum that most soldiers would spend their entire career trying to generate. I'm not walking away from it, Carter said. I'm redirecting it. There's a difference. She looked at Okafor. The best thing my father ever did was not win competitions. It was teach me to shoot. One person teaching one person over years with patience and precision and the specific commitment of someone who cares more about whether you get it right than about being the one who gets credit for it. She paused. That's what lasts, not the engagements. The people who carry what the engagements taught forward. Okafor studied her for a long moment. You're 31 years old, she said. Yes, ma'am. You have 20 or more operational years ahead of you. Yes, ma'am. And you want to spend them teaching. I want to spend them making sure that the next time a team is pinned down in a valley in eastern Afghanistan. Carter said, the soldier on the ridge doesn't have to figure it out alone. I want to be the reason they already know. The room was quiet. Outside the base continued its constant operational noise, the sound of a place that was always between one thing and the next. Okafor looked at her notebook. She wrote something. I can make that happen, she said. It'll require some structural creativity. The program you're describing doesn't exist in exactly the form you're describing it. I know, Carter said. I'd need to build it. Okafor almost smiled. Of course you would, she said. I'll make some calls. When the Silver Star ceremony happened on a Thursday afternoon, and it had the quality that military ceremonies always have. When they're for something real, a specific weight, a specific texture of silence between the words, the feeling of an institution trying to find language adequate to an experience that exceeds what language was built to hold. Walker presented. He stood in front of Carter and read from the citation, and his voice was steady all the way through except for one moment, which was the line that described the 47-minute engagement. And at that moment, there was something in his voice that wasn't quite emotion and wasn't quite pride, and was more accurately described as the sound of a person confronting a fact that still, 2 weeks later, slightly exceeded his capacity to process. He pinned the medal, he stepped back, he saluted. She returned it. The assembled personnel, her team, the SEAL operators Marsh Hollis Okafor, a dozen others whose careers had been tangentially altered by the events of the 14th, stood in the specific silence of people who are watching something be formally acknowledged that they already understood privately, and that feels both larger and more human when it becomes official. Hargrove was there. He stood in the back, not in a place of prominence, not making himself visible, just present. She noticed him when she turned after the ceremony, and they held eye contact for a moment across the assembled group. He nodded, she nodded back. That was all, but it was enough. The reception afterward was the informal kind, which meant a room, some food that was better than standard, FOB quality, because someone had made an effort in the specific social dynamic of a group of people who have been through something together trying to navigate the return to ordinary human interaction. Marcus Doyle found Carter first. He came directly without the social circling that characterized most of these events and stood in front of her with the directness that was simply his natural mode. I wrote something, he said. I heard, she said. You read it. Walker sent it to me. And she considered. You didn't use my name, she said. No. But everyone knows. Yes, he said. That was the point. You can't hide from what you did, Carter. You can just choose how people come to know it. She looked at him. You described what it felt like from inside, she said. Nobody's ever done that before. Written about what it feels like to be on the receiving end of someone else's decision to stay. Nobody's ever done it, he said, because the people who were on the receiving end of that decision usually didn't come home to write about it. She absorbed this. Thank you, she said. Thank you, he said. We're not even close to even on this. We don't keep score, she said. He almost smiled. Speak for yourself, he said. I've been keeping score since the moment that machine gun went quiet and I realized someone I couldn't see had just given me back my life. That's a score I'm going to carry for the rest of mine. She said nothing, but she didn't look away. Hollis found her 20 minutes later near the edge of the room where the crowd was thinner and the noise was more manageable. The external drive, Carter said. Yes, Hollis said, you still have it. It's been submitted to the board's permanent record, along with the timestamp documentation and the transmission logs. Hollis looked at her steadily. Everything that happened on the 14th is preserved completely. Every order, every response, every decision in sequence, including the revision, including both drafts, Hollis said, the original and the revision, both timestamps, the delta between them. Carter nodded. You took a significant risk, she said. I took the risk that I decided I could live with, Hollis said. That seems to be the theme of this particular story. Carter looked at her. You've been in Hargrove's chain of command for 3 years, she said. Yes. This didn't make that easy. No, Hollis said, but some things are more important than easy. She paused. He knows what I submitted. He's known since the board. He hasn't made it difficult. I know, Carter said. He surprised me. He surprised himself, Hollis said. I think that's actually the hardest part of what he's been living with. Not the accountability, the surprise of finding out who he was under pressure. She looked across the room to where Hargrove was standing alone with a coffee cup. That's a thing a person has to integrate. Who you became when you stopped thinking and just reacted. And then who you became when you had time to think about it afterward. Carter followed her gaze. He chose right the second time, she said. Yes, Hollis said. Most people only get one chance to choose. He got 2. That's either very lucky or very hard depending on how you look at it. Walker found her last. The room had thinned by then, the ceremony's social gravity dispersing as people drifted back to the operational work that was always waiting. And Carter was standing near the door with her coffee, going cold in her hand, the way she stood when she was simultaneously present and somewhere else present in the room, somewhere else in the long chain of consequence and decision that had brought her to this particular Thursday afternoon. Okafor told me about the teaching program, he said. I thought she might. She said, you want to build something that doesn't exist yet. The pieces exist, Carter said. They're just in different places. Marksmanship doctrine here, decision-making under stress protocols there, tactical assessment training in a third place. Nobody's assembled them into a coherent program that treats those things as parts of the same integrated capability. She looked at him. They are parts of the same integrated capability. The shot is the last thing. Everything before the shot, the reading the assessment, the decision architecture, the patience, that's the actual skill. The shot just confirms whether you did the rest of it right. Your father taught you that, Walker said. My father taught me everything worth knowing, she said. The rest I learned by making mistakes. What does the program look like, he said, when you build it? She thought about it. It starts with patience, she said, not as a personality trait, as a trained discipline, the ability to hold a position, absorb information, resist the pressure to act before you understand the situation completely. Most training programs get to patience eventually. I want to start there. She paused. Then decision architecture under incomplete information. Because the information is always incomplete. The question is always how incomplete you can tolerate before the window closes. That calculus, that's not instinct, that's trainable. I want to train it. And the shooting is easy, she said. Relatively, the shooting is physics and repetition and the elimination of interference. Once you've built the foundation, the patience, the decision, architecture, the assessment, the shooting is just the delivery mechanism for everything you've already decided. Walker was quiet for a moment. You're going to be an extraordinary teacher, he said. I'm going to be a demanding one, she said. There's a difference. There isn't actually, he said. The best teachers are both. She looked at him. Walker, she said. What? Thank you for coming back to the ridge. She paused. I know I said it before. I'm saying it again because the first time I said it, I was running on empty, and I'm not sure it came out the way I meant it. He looked at her. How did you mean it? He said. I meant that nobody comes back, she said. In my experience, you do the job, you create the outcome, and then the people the outcome benefited are somewhere else being okay while you figure out how to get yourself off the mountain. She held his gaze. You came back. That's not nothing. No, he said, it's not. It's actually everything, she said, in my experience. He was quiet for a moment. When the program is operational, he said, I want my team to go through it, every rotation before deployment. That's going to be a standing requirement if Okafor has anything to say about it, she said. I know, he said. I'm saying I want it because it's right, not because it's required. There's a difference. She almost smiled. There is, she said. That distinction matters more than people think. You sound like your father. The worst possible insult, she said, and the best possible compliment, simultaneously. He would have appreciated that. She left Afghanistan on a Saturday, and she left quietly, which was the only way she knew how to leave anything. No formal departure, no assembled group. She said the individual goodbyes that needed saying. Doyle, who shook her hand without the performance that handshakes sometimes have. Walker, who walked her to the transport vehicle and stood beside it for a moment without feeling the need to fill the moment with words. Hollis, who was already back at her terminal when Carter stopped by the operations center and who looked up and said simply, good luck with the program, and looked back down, which was exactly right. Torres, the medic who had sutured her hand and asked her about her father, was on shift in the medical tent. She stopped there last. How's the hand? He said. She held it up. The stitches were out. The scar was clean and small, the kind that would fade to almost nothing in a year. Good work, she said. The patient cooperated, he said. Unusual. She looked at him. If you ever want a different kind of work, she said, I'm building a program. I could use someone who understands that the physical and the psychological aren't actually separate things. Torres looked at her for a moment. What kind of program? The kind that prepares people for situations where they have to make the hardest decisions of their lives with incomplete information and no time, she said. The kind that didn't exist before. Torres was quiet for a moment. I've got 18 months left on my current contract, he said. That's about how long it'll take to get the program into its first operational cycle, she said. He looked at her. I'll think about it, he said. That's all I'm asking, she said. She walked out of the medical tent into the specific quality of early morning light that existed at this altitude in this part of the world. The light that had no interest in sentiment, that illuminated everything with the same even indifference, the good and the hard, and the spaces between them equally. She thought about her father. She thought about the hawk. She thought about a hawk holding position and wind that should have been pushing it sideways, working with the force, instead of fighting it patient in the specific way that patient people are patient, not passively, not waiting for conditions to improve, but actively, deliberately using the time the waiting costs to see more completely than someone moving through the same space could ever see. She thought about the 47 minutes. She thought about the first shot, the machine gun going quiet, the specific silence of a threat removed in the feeling, not triumph. Nothing like triumph, something quieter and more serious. The feeling of a decision confirmed by outcome. She thought about every soldier she was going to teach to hold that silence inside themselves, to develop the capacity to be still, enough patient, enough honest enough about what they could and couldn't see, precise enough in the gap between seeing and acting, to know in the moment when everything demanded they move, whether staying was courage or avoidance. That was the lesson, not the shooting, not the engagement record, not the medal. The lesson was the question that preceded every decision. Do you understand what you're looking at completely enough to act? And if the answer was no, do you have the courage to wait? The program launched 11 months later. It was called the Precision Decision Integration Course, which was the formal name that appeared in official documents and which nobody who went through it ever used. The people who went through it called it simply what it was, Carter's course. The first cohort was 16 soldiers drawn from various branches and specialties, selected by a process that Okafor's office had developed with Carter's input and that weighted above all other factors. Not performance history, but the specific quality of judgment under pressure. The evidence in each candidate's record of decisions made correctly in situations where making them incorrectly would have been understandable. Carter stood in front of them on the first morning and looked at 16 people who were looking back at her with the various expressions of soldiers who have heard enough about the course to know they're about to be challenged in ways they haven't been challenged before and who are not entirely sure they're ready. She let them look. She said, "You're here because someone in your chain of command believes you have the foundation for something specific. Not the strongest combat record, not the highest marksmanship score. The record that suggests you can think accurately under conditions designed to make accurate thinking nearly impossible." She paused. "We're going to find out whether that assessment is correct. And I want to be clear about something from the beginning. This course is not about producing people who can hit targets. It's about producing people who can decide correctly quickly under maximum pressure whether hitting a target is the right action at this moment, given what they know and what they don't know, and what the consequences of both action and inaction are likely to be." She looked at them. "The shooting," she said, "we get to eventually. Everything before it, that's the whole program." One soldier, young early 20s with the specific alert quality of someone who is processing fast, raised his hand. "Staff Sergeant," he said, "can I ask what the program is based on? What experience generated the curriculum?" Carter looked at him. "A ridge in eastern Afghanistan," she said, "and a man who taught me to watch a hawk." The soldier looked confused. That was fine. He would understand by the end of the course. They all would. 18 months after the engagement, at Grid Reference, November Kilo 77, the program that Olivia Carter built, had run 3 cohorts and produced 47 graduates, each of whom carried into their subsequent deployments a framework for decision-making under pressure that had not existed in formal doctrine before. 2 of those graduates in operations in 2 different theaters made decisions under fire that were later attributed in formal after-action reviews to training they received in Carter's course. Both operations succeeded. Both teams came home. Walker visited the program during its 3rd cohort and sat in on a session where Carter was running a scenario, a simulated communications blackout during a rapid engagement, forcing students to make targeting decisions based on incomplete information against a time pressure that Carter controlled from her position at the front of the room, and that she adjusted in real time based on whether the students were learning from the discomfort or simply being overwhelmed by it. He watched her work. He watched the way she moved around the room. Not the movement of someone performing instruction, but the movement of someone genuinely engaged with the problem of how to transfer hard-won knowledge into minds that hadn't had the specific experience that generated it. The patience was visible. The precision was visible. The specific quality of attention she gave each student, the way she seemed to understand not just what they were doing wrong, but why not just the error, but its architecture. After the session, she came and sat beside him. "How does it look?" she said. "It looks like you were born to do this," he said. "I was built to do it," she said. "There's a distinction." "Your father again." "Always," she said. He was quiet for a moment. 47 graduates, he said, in 18 months. 47 is a small number, she said. "It's 47 more than existed before you built this," he said. She looked at the empty room, the chairs still arranged in the formation of the session that had just ended. "It's a start," she said. "Carter," he said. She looked at him. "You saved 8 lives on that ridge," he said. "And now you're building something that's going to save lives you'll never meet in operations, you'll never know about in situations that haven't happened yet." He met her eyes. "That's not a start, that's a legacy." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about all the things she could say to that. She thought about deflection, about the careful precision with which she had always managed the distance between what she had done and what she was willing to accept credit for. She thought about her father, who built something in one person with a patience that took years and never saw the full scope of what he had built. She thought about Emma Kellerman, who was 2.5 years old now, with her father's eyes, growing up in a world where 47 soldiers were more prepared to come home because one woman refused to leave a ridge. She thought about what it meant to build something that outlasted you, what it meant to teach someone something that they would carry into a moment you would never see and use it to make a decision that would bring people home. She looked at Walker. And for once, for the first time since she had looked through a scope on a ridge in eastern Afghanistan and made a decision that changed everything, she let herself accept what he was saying without finding a way to set it aside. "Yeah," she said quietly, "maybe it is." Outside, the next cohort of students was arriving. She could hear them, voices, boots, the purposeful sound of people walking towards something they didn't fully understand yet and were willing to face anyway. She stood up. She went to meet them. Because the work was never finished. Because the next generation was always arriving. Because the most powerful shot Olivia Carter ever fired was not the one that silenced the machine gun on the North Ridge, not the one that cleared the helicopter's approach path, not any of the 14 engagements that the board had formally documented and the institution had formally recognized. The most powerful shot she ever fired was the lesson delivered with patience, with precision, with the absolute conviction of someone who understood down to the bone that the difference between the soldier who stays and the soldier who breaks was not strength, not talent, not the specific classification level buried in a personnel jacket. It was the decision, made clearly, made honestly, made in full knowledge of the Kitish, and made anyway. That was what she taught. That was what they learned. That was what they carried. And that not the medal, not the formal findings, not the theater record that would preserve the events of the 14th in precise institutional language. For as long as the institution existed, that was what could not be buried, could not be reversed, or could not be ordered to stand down. That was the thing that lasted.